Hello again from the Money Corner. Last week we had two marketing specialists from Merrill Lynch, David Geliebter and Sheila Margady, talk about tax shelters. David is a marketing specialist in oil and gas, and Sheila, the very attractive young lady on my right, is a specialist on tax shelters in the entertainment business, more specifically movies. I assume, Sheila, it's possible that someday you could do a tax shelter on a Broadway play or any one of several vehicles in the entertainment world.
You certainly could, but you know, these days, because of the emergence of what we call the ancillary markets, which I'll define in a second.
Not a second, now.
Now, okay,
Immediately.
okay. Cable television, the video market, cassettes and video discs, something called pay-per-view, where you can watch a show and not pay for a whole service, but just pay to see one movie.
Merchandising. For example, if you had a Superman film, a Superman cape, the royalties or the rights.
Absolutely. You can have a record album that is based upon a film.
For example, on Chariots of Fire, the music is very, very popular.
Exactly.
And the music is generating a lot of revenue, which in turn becomes revenue and profit for the investor in a tax shelter.
The important thing to do when you do an entertainment tax shelter is to make sure that the investor benefits not just from the theatrical motion picture market, but from every market. This way, first of all, you get additional sources of revenue, and then you spread your risk. If a film fails in one market, there are other places that you can make money, and you can wind up having a successful investment that way.
David, could you tie in with us? There is a distinction here. Sheila is in the world of entertainment, motion pictures. You're essentially in oil and gas. Now, there are ongoing residuals or ongoing revenues for your participants, your limited partners, if you're lucky enough to find oil.
Yeah.
You're in the position you could have a complete strikeout.
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, just to follow up on what Sheila said, what we do in the oil and gas business is that we diversify. That's really the secret to this business. If you're drilling one well, you live or die by the results of the one well, which can be very, very significant, or obviously can be a dry hole. What we try to do is diversify enough, spread your risks enough so that if we have some successful wells, you're going to do very well, but at least bottom line, you're not going to end up with a 0-to-1 program. So the diversification is the key to this business as far as the results go. I should mention, oil is very important. People think in terms of oil, they see the price every day, but equally, if in many cases, even more important is gas, because natural gas represents a substantial portion of what most of these programs are going after, because that's what the United States happens to have a lot of. So that can go on for anywhere from, say on average, 10 to 20 years. A well can produce for many, many years.
Well, let's assume that I were a limited investor in one of your oil and gas deals, and I were fortunate enough to participate in a well that struck gas. You're saying then that I would receive revenue for as much as 10 years or 15 years or however long that well keeps turning out product.
Right, right. What is probably going to happen is that down the road, and I'm talking historically what has happened in the past, you're either going to give that investment away at some point, and the new laws make it very favorable.
Who will give it away? The limited partner will give it away?
The limited partner will give it away.
In what way? In his estate or to his children?
To his children. Now, the new ERTA, the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, it's very favorable to gift because of the $10,000 a year exclusion on gifting. So you can gift this investment away. The reason that it's very attractive is in the first 2 years of an oil and gas program, you take substantially 100% write-off. In other words, if you put $1 in, you basically write that investment off. And then the income stream...
By writing that investment off, let's assume that you have income of $25,000 a year, and you put $10,000 into a oil and gas well, and then you write off 100%. What does that do to your gross income?
Okay. Well, if you're earning, I should say only.
Okay,
25
the 50% bracket.
You have to be in the 50% bracket. So let's assume that you earn, say, $60,000 or $70,000.
Okay. You're going to have to hold off on your big dollar earnings now because it's time for us to have a public service announcement. We'll be back with you in just a moment. Stay with us, please. We're talking to David Geliebter and Sheila Margady of Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith, two marketing specialists in tax shelters. David, just before our break, you mentioned, or I tried to draw out how we work this thing of the write-off in relation to one's income. Pick a figure, gross earnings, year one, 100% write-off. What does it look like on the income tax return?
Okay, very simple. Let's take just some rough figures. Let's say that you earned $70,000 last year, and let's say that you made this investment last year, $70,000, and you're in a 50% tax bracket, and you invest $10,000, and the investment over the next year has a 100% write-off.
Right.
That gives you a $10,000 deduction.
In other words, it reduces your gross income to $60,000?
Right. So, which is like saving $5,000, because if you're in a 50% bracket, you normally would have to pay $5,000. So Uncle Sam, in effect, is paying for half of your investment. You, bottom line, are putting in 5. Uncle Sam is putting in 5.
Okay, now let's go on to step number 2, and I want to stay with this due diligence, particularly in the oil and gas business, David. My understanding is that frequently, before you go ahead on a venture, you will have a consultant, an independent consultant, who will help you talk a little more about the probabilities of success.
I would say always have an independent consultant.
Now, even though you're working with the major oil companies and the major drillers who have a good deal of experience and expertise on their own right.
And even though we have 7 full-time investment bankers who, many of them are petroleum engineers, we have an attorney on staff, we have a whole group of attorneys that we have on retainer. With all of that, we still find it very, very necessary to bring in independent consultants, because when you're drilling, especially in some of the areas that we drill in, you need local expertise, and it's very, very important that you have people that have that kind of expertise and can go in there and do the evaluations and, like you say, the economic studies to make sure that it's feasible and that our investors have every opportunity to make a good investment and have a good return on their investment.
Sheila, I've had more experience with oil and gas. The marketing of films is comparatively new for me. I'm not sure. I would assume you have some expertise in terms of your due diligence, perhaps not comparable to David. I don't know how you get an expert that'll help you on the success of the film.
Well, in any deal, especially with the new Tax Act, anything that we provide to investors has to be economic. It has to be feasible economically.
Economically viable.
That's right. It has to be an investment that we feel will provide not only tax write-offs, but good investment
value. But how
value.
can you know that in a film? A film is
you can take a look
so terribly subjective.
Well, what you do is, first of all, you don't just invest in one film. You invest in a package of films. That's the first point. And you make sure that the package is represented by a major distributor, like the ones that you mentioned.
Well, you mentioned distributor. Okay, before in this segment or last week's segment, I mentioned MGM, 20th Century Fox, Columbia Pictures. But distribution is just one part of this thing. We're talking about the product itself, which is the negative. That involves good writers. That involves good, competent actors, competent directors, competent producers. Is this where the expertise comes from?
Well, as I said, part of it comes out of a study of the feasibility of the investment in general. You take a look at the major companies within the industry and you see they have public figures. Have they been successful? Have they been profitable over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, etc.?
You take an Apocalypse Now with that famous producer.
Yes. Well, the point is there are many, many things to consider. Each individual film, you obviously cannot make a judgment about its artistic value. We're not in that position.
Could you name some of the films that you've underwritten that are on the market now?
Well, the last major partnership that we had as a motion picture investment was called SLM Entertainment, and that was a joint venture between our investors and MGM.
We're going to have to hear more about it next week. We've reached the end of our segment. Thank you for being with us tonight. We'll have Sheila and David back here next week, continue our discussion on tax shelters. Join us then. Good night.